Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke, and I am joined by the victorious James Lledo. James, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show before your amateur debut for Brawl in the Berg 12-247 Fighting Championships, which was just a couple days ago. You put on a clinic, you put on a show, you won by armbar in the second round, and it's exciting. You're a starting member of the Pit Panther wrestling team, making your MMA debut in fantastic fashion. So let's start, if it's okay with you. Let's start with the warm-up. Let's start with, how did that compare to wrestling? I know you've done a ton of wrestling. You've been under a lot of pressure. What was the walkout like? What was the cage like? What was everything before the bell started the fight? What was that like for you?
There was definitely some backstage nerves, and I know that's normal. But once we started working out and getting warmed up, I felt so much better. And me and my teammate Josh Wisoki, we got some good shadow boxing rounds in, and a couple of good takedown practices and lifts, and I was really warm and loose and ready to go. And that really helped my confidence, knowing that I was ready to go to step in there. And the walkout was amazing. The place was electric, and seeing all my friends and family there cheering me on and trying to give me high fives and stuff while I'm walking in there, it was amazing. And I'll never forget that. It was, in a way, a lot like wrestling, with how I prepared and that knowledge that I do have from preparing for a wrestling match, and making sure that I get a good warm up in, and then walking out to that mat was very similar, but at the same time, very different.
Well, one of the exciting parts about your walkout and your opponent's walkout, he brought a crowd too. People were excited for him. That's good when there's two sides hoping for a really great fight. I mean, you want that. You want the attention and the fanfare. One of the things that you mentioned is that you warmed up, you trained out Stout, Pittsburgh, and you warmed up with Vasaki. He's competed for 247 before, which is nice. What was it like? I've known Mike Wilkins for a long time. He's a Bellator veteran. He's a CFFC veteran. He's obviously very established. I think he's now sort of officially, unofficially retired, but he's a big trainer at Stout. What was it like having him in the warm-up process? What was it like having him just be there for you, or whoever your coaches were? But I saw him there for you.
It was amazing. I mean, he wants to see me do well, and he's helped me a lot with my training. And yeah, he really believed that I could go out there and dominate. And when I was a little bit nervous and stuff, he'd hype me up a lot and let me know who I am.
Well, you mentioned doing some lifts in warm up. And by that, you mean like a takedown lift, right? Where you get underneath, double leg, and pick it up. Now, I know that you used that a bunch of times in the fight. It was very, very exciting. But let's walk through just the first round. Your fight didn't go super long. One round is 2 minutes, and the second round didn't go long. So what was it like getting your double leg, doing the lift, but having to deal with the fact that there was striking involved? That's a big difference. Well, you know what? I'm going to back my question up one more. James, what was it like coming out, touching gloves, and having a striking element before the grappling? Because that's one thing in MMA. You come out in a striking stance. What was that like before your first takedown?
I wasn't used to it. I was unfamiliar with it, but it is so much easier to take someone down in a fight when they're standing straight up than in a wrestling, when they're in their stance and stuff. And yeah, to be honest, in a wrestling match, I find myself thinking a lot more and being able to know what I'm doing. But when I was in there, it was just all gas, no brakes, and just do whatever you trained. And it felt like Ultra Instinct, honestly, just going in there and letting myself do the work and not thinking about it.
Well, all gas, no brakes is a great mindset to have. And I appreciate you comparing wrestling, which obviously is a very technical sport. So is MMA. But for people that really, really like wrestling, both wrestlers are trying to do the exact same thing. And so you talked about stance, the hands are in a position where the head is even used to block, and all of those things. Whereas in MMA, your opponent might be trying to do something exactly opposite of what you're trying to do. In his case, he seemed to be swinging a lot, which, like you said, kept him up. You're able to take him down. You landed, I didn't get an exact count, but at one point we were joking on the commentary team that you might have broken the wood for the cage
Yeah.
because you had some really, really nice slams, those elevation slams. What was it like to get those in an MMA environment as opposed to a wrestling environment?
In the MMA environment, like in wrestling, both of those slams would have been illegal.
Really?
And,
Okay.
yeah, in college wrestling with the folk style rules, both of them were illegal. And like, yeah, you can't spike somebody like that. And
Is it because of your hands or is it because of where they land?
just like, I mean, both slams were like I left my feet,
Oh, yes.
came down, and if I'm pretty sure you can't do that. And you can do it in freestyle, like international wrestling,
Okay.
but in
Oh,
college
wow.
that. So I haven't done that very much. It kind of just happened. And I mean, I do think I bring that element to the cage of like being exciting. And like I had him up in the air and I was like, all right, I got to do something cool. Like I don't want to just take him down. But yeah, I was.
It was really exciting. The crowd reacted, and obviously takedowns in wrestling are a huge deal too. You know, people get excited about them. There's an element of being on the ground that you used. You know, obviously you got a submission win, and so that's not in wrestling because a submission, you know, is the only submission in wrestling is a pin. So, but before we get there, I know you weren't allowed to strike to the head. Still, being on those huge slams. And I commented about one of the things you did, obviously, in those big slams, is you cleared his legs out. So he didn't get you in guard. He couldn't have thrown up an armbar, or the wrestler's Achilles heel is the guillotine. People can't guillotine you if you've got them like that because they need their legs to be able to hold you in. So what was it like working some side or crossbody, side and mount? What was it like being in those dominant positions, which in wrestling, the fight's over or the match is over because they're flat on their back. That's kind of the goal. But in MMA, you have to keep going from there. So what was it like being in some of those positions?
Well, to be honest, at Stout, I've only done like 3 jiu-jitsu classes so far. I've done it like all striking with Coach Will, and Mike has shown me some jiu-jitsu stuff, and I'm going to definitely keep working on it. But yeah, before this fight, I had only done like 3 of those classes. But I mean, I was working with a couple of Mat Factory guys on Saturday sparring, and they showed me some good stuff about like getting to the side so you can get to side control and then eventually full mount.
Yeah.
But I mean, it kind of was just like instinct. Like I don't want to just get stuck. So in wrestling, I focus a lot on trying to get those legs cleared out, and it just felt so natural in there. And without the ground and pound, I was thinking about that a lot. I was like, well, if I can't punch him on the face when I'm on the ground, how else am I going to hurt him? So I better like really put my weight into this. And if he can't land on his legs, he's going to land on his head. So that.
Well, and the shoulder, both times or 3 or 4 times, he didn't land on his head, but your shoulder was somewhere in his chest breathing area, which I'm sure was a bit of a hit. I actually am glad very early in novice MMA because that there's not ground and pound. I know for a wrestler, you'd love there to be there, but Virginia State has pro rules in amateurs, like brand new. The problem with that is a guy who's never been in a cage before is eating elbows and on the ground. And that just seems like a lot to handle for a very first fight. So I think it was good that you got into those positions in a pro level rule set or an advanced amateur level rule set. The same thing you did to your opponent would just have had a greater effect because of ground and pound. It was still very dominant what you did. And I think it helps you think a little bit more when you can't just start throwing punches. That could be a good thing. Now, I believe you went for an armbar earlier in the fight, and now I know why it didn't quite work out because you've only had three classes of jiu-jitsu. So Do you want to break that one down for you, the one that didn't work out, and kind of how you scrambled out of it, because you still showed your wrestling skill there?
Yeah. So after that, like arm triangle didn't work out. Uh, the arm bar felt like it was there when he was getting up, but I didn't throw my leg over his head, which is what I think you're supposed to do. But
Yes,
he,
that's a requirement. That's a requirement. Yes.
yeah, and I didn't do that, and he rolled in like to his base, and then I just tried to take his back and like keep wrestling,
Right.
because if I didn't keep wrestling, he would have ended up on top, and
Right.
I just made sure that even though I messed that up, it's right on to the next thing, which was trying to get that choke.
Absolutely. And that's something that you, as a high level Division I wrestler, I mean, I've been in wrestling rooms and watched it. I know you guys train chain wrestling, where something, they block this, they block that. You start with a single leg, and then everybody knows he's going to block it because that's the drill. We got to switch to the double and all those different things. So it's great. And it's nice in the grappling exchanges that a technique could kind of, not go the way you wanted it to, and you still keep it moving. Because if everything has to be perfect, that's not wrestling and that's not MMA. There's kind of, obviously the stout guys will tell you, but there's kind of two main rules for doing that. One is the leg. The other one is to keep your crotch very, very close to the armpit. So sometimes people can throw the leg over, but if they're loose, like if their crotch is on the guy's elbow and not up in their armpit, then they can pull their arm in and roll on top. So, and that's something, obviously, as a wrestler, you have such body awareness. Once you get a little bit more technical on that, I'm impressed. I think Stout obviously made a great decision to focus on stand-up, because that's where you need to grow the most in and let you be natural on the ground. I have talked to Mike Wilkins back when he was still doing MMA, and he was a coach back then as well. And he told me on this podcast that when he gives fighters suggestions and coaching in between rounds, if they don't listen to him, he turns their back on them, which I've actually seen him do. He didn't do that to you. But what was his advice? What was it like getting into that corner from a wrestler? You're not used to getting 45 seconds where you can recover more. Wrestling, they don't give you more than 15, 20 seconds. So what was it like making it to your first break? What was that advice like? What was that relationship like, getting that coaching before your second round?
Actually, one of the first things he said to me, it was like right after the second slam, he said, "Don't knock yourself out, like trying to slam this kid too hard." And he was right, because on that second one, I really tried to put everything into it, and I did hit my head a little. I have a sore neck today, but
I was going to ask you that, because we had a great view as commentary, and I mentioned that, well, it was very exciting. I mentioned the fact that your head got close. I didn't realize that you actually hit. There's a couple famous examples in the UFC where guys have speared themselves in that type of takedown and knocked themselves out. And so obviously some awareness there is important. I'm glad you're okay. And it was that second takedown. I remember the crown at the top part of your head. To me, it looked like it got really close to the mat. It turned out it hit the mat. You went back to the armbar in the second round. What made you do that? We'll walk it through. It was a very pretty armbar for people that might remember back to the Miesha Tate being armbarred by Ronda Rousey in Strikeforce. You were starting to turn his elbow inside out. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was definitely starting to hyperextend. So it was a picture perfect armbar. But what made you go back to the armbar the second time in the second round?
Well, with my wrestling, I always have valued that it's important to like always keep wrestling and show that like your flow is super important to like being able to finish moves in like the chain wrestling. And when I got that takedown in the second round and I got full mount, it was like just instinct. Like, you got to go straight for this. Like, now that you're in full mount and he had both his arms up, like trying to offer something, I just felt that arm there, swung out to the side and pushed it. And that is actually the first time like I've ever done an arm bar like on anybody, like in practice or anything. So I'm glad it went well.
Well, it was picture perfect. That's another reason why for people that are on their back in MMA and they try the bench press approach, on your back in MMA, you should keep elbows kind of bladed and down like this, because what he did is gave you an option to either go back to the side triangle choke, which is one of my favorite finishes, and you had tried it earlier, where basically if his arms up like that, all you got to do is pop it off, slide down, and you're back to that. You obviously took the armbar. He was in there for a little bit. You know, he didn't tap right away. I could tell, and I think people on our side could tell that you had it locked up perfectly. If you don't have it locked up perfectly, they have a bend in it like this. You had it locked up perfectly. His arm was starting to hyperextend. I talked to the referee afterwards, and he was close to stopping it without the tap. Your opponent ended up tapping, but the referee doesn't want an arm to be broken in an amateur fight. In a pro fight, break away, but this, it's an amateur fight. When did you realize that it was really locked in there? Because he was in there a little bit. He didn't tap right away.
I was actually really surprised at his flexibility because I had that arm bar and it was straight at first, and then it did, like, start to go out to the side a little bit, and then once I like put it behind my bit and then like cinched it back and was pulling it, I knew it was like it had to be over or else it was gonna break. But I felt it and I was like, well, since I've never done it, I was like, am I doing this right? Like, isn't he supposed to tap right now? But like once I cinched it up, put it behind my armpit, and then put it back, I was like, all right, this has to be right. And
You can tell because that's a little higher level to adjust from handling it on your chest to going off to the opposite armpit, because obviously your chest is preventing the arm from getting as low as it can when it goes off your armpit. And then, of course, it's also nice that you can lock it in with one arm and then potentially have another arm free for something else. That's a higher level move there that you did, not even knowing if what you were doing was right. I know Coach Drew Headley is one of your coaches, and I worked with his dad at Waynesburg University for years, Coach Ron Headley. And so it's just really great to see when you're well coached in wrestling and you've had thousands of hours in practice that you just know how to get to positions that work, even if they're not like what you were taught to do for that armbar. You did everything right in there. Obviously, your coaches will tweak things as you go. Have you, and this is just a side note, have you fallen into the Kimura? Because I know in wrestling you can do the Kimura, but you can't finish it. Have you kind of fallen into that in practice sometimes? Because that is kind of a wrestling move.
My last jiu-jitsu class that I did at Stout, we actually went over the Kimura, and I like it, but I haven't had too many opportunities so far to like keep doing it. But I definitely want to keep improving on that and improve my jiu-jitsu overall.
Well, sure, absolutely. And the Kimura can be used from mount and things like that. Some people have used it, but it's really more of an off your back. And so something like your head arm triangle choke, the arm bar, and a few other submissions from mount or side control might make more sense than something that's more of an off your back. It was thrilling to watch. You did get the tap. Like I said, I was watching Chip Snyder. He was starting to move in because he did end up when your opponent tapped, he pushed down on the armbar. And a little note for referees out there, and I learned this from Chip Snyder, that if somebody's in a bad armbar, a lot of referees end up pushing on the person doing the armbar, like if Chip had pushed on you, but that ends up giving it a couple seconds delay. And so a more experienced referee pushes directly on the elbow because that way it provides alleviation, which Chip did an incredible job. What did it feel like? Because in wrestling, they can't tap. What did it feel like to actually get a tap? You said you knew in your mind, I'm doing this right. He should be tapping. What was it like actually getting that tap as opposed to wrestling where you're more or less going for a pin or points?
Oh man, it was like a pin on crack.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the feeling you get from like pinning somebody like you just want to pound your chest. But
Yeah.
that, it was like amazing. It was the best feeling in the world. Like I did get like deja vu from like pins. Like it was like
Oh.
I stopped it, like I finished the fight, like I finished the match. It was a great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the best expressions I've ever heard a wrestler say. It was like a pin on crack. But you're absolutely right. In wrestling, you hold positions until a referee who's sliding around looking slaps the mat, which ends up becoming sort of that experience, that jubilation. It's not your opponent tapping out. It's not your opponent surrendering. It's the referee. In this case, your opponent actually gives it up. Oh, the referee can also stop it. It's just really exciting to kind of see your first experience not only go so well, but you be so mentally clear when you were in there. I know that you have 3 more years of wrestling at Pitt left because of the COVID year. I didn't realize that. I thought you had maybe 2 left, but I forgot about COVID year. So how does your MMA experience play into that? When do you transition back to Pitt? What's the game plan going forward?
My goal is to get one more fight this summer, at hopefully, and after the end of August, if I do get that fight, I'll probably just train MMA and compete in wrestling during the whole year, and then hopefully compete again next summer and do that every year until I graduate.
It's thrilling that you already have a game plan. Obviously, I'd love you to come on before if you do get a fight still in the summer. I'd love you to come back on and talk about it before and after because it's so exciting. But let me ask you this question. What do you think it'll be like training MMA and wrestling? I mean, time-wise, you're a Division I starter. And that's a ton of time. That's like a full-time job there. Plus, you're a student. What do you think it's going to be like training wrestling and MMA at the same time, which is something I don't think you've done before? I think you started this with your coach's permission after the season, if I'm right about that.
Yeah. Well, we just started it after the season, but I scheduled all my classes in the morning so I could go to Stout after practice. And I do always find time to put school first and get all of that done. But I do that because this is so important to me. And I make sure that I do get to train both and get that work in.
That's a great answer. Academics always have to come first. If you're in school, that's what's going to make a bigger difference long term. And it just shows self-discipline and time management. And we've seen that. If this ends up becoming a career for you, being self-disciplined and having good time management is what makes a difference between an okay MMA fighter and a great MMA fighter. So I think the fact that you're disciplined already in that is enormously beneficial. It's been an honor calling your first MMA fight. I get to say that I called your first ever debut MMA fight. If things go well and you end up big time, which hopefully you do, I'm going to walk that around as my big feather in my cap. But it's been absolutely incredible watching you. I know some of your coaches, both at Stout and obviously at Pittsburgh. It's just great to see you coached well, receptive to that, humble to know that, you've got to take the coaching you're getting. It's been an honor. I appreciate you coming on. Congratulations again, James Lledo, in your first ever MMA victory. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You got it. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
All right.